Good morning, students. Welcome to the third presentation for LSK3701 Life Skills Science and Technology Teaching in the Foundation Phase. This is your presentation on Learning Unit 2, and I am your lecturer, Mrs. A Carrim, and you can email me on ecarrier1@unisa.ac.za for any further support. So the purpose of this presentation is basically to give you a brief introduction to help you become familiar with the content of Learning Unit 2. As you can see, I've snipped the piece of the contents page of Learning Unit 2 so that you have an understanding or a brief familiarity on all the content that you need to go through when it comes to this learning unit. Okay, so the components of science learning is basically after you have completed this learning unit, you should be able to identify scientific concepts and science process skills in science investigations, and obviously use appropriate examples to demonstrate your understanding of scientific concepts and science process skills, in order to be able to use these process skills within your lessons, your teaching and assessments eventually as well. Explain how scientific investigative skills affect children's understanding of the nature of science and scientific literacy, and using scenarios to identify, interpret, and analyze children's thinking processes in the learning of science. So if you think of the previous learning units, you were introduced to what science is. In other words, its nature. You learned that young learners develop their ideas about the nature of science through developing scientific literacy. So in this unit, you will be introduced to the components of science that are taught in the foundation phase to facilitate the development of learners' scientific literacy. So while you study this unit, you will develop science content knowledge that is necessary for teaching science in the foundation phase. So you will obtain most of this content knowledge yourself, in terms of magazines, newspapers, libraries, the internet. So the science topics that must be taught are stated in the curriculum documents. Remember, I told you it's very important that you work with the CAPS Life Skills document for the foundation phase. And the topics are typically categorized into one of the science knowledge strands using the position of the curricular guide, in terms of our teaching about the world. So the beginning knowledge section of the curriculum and assessment policy statement, which is the CAPS document, life skills for the foundation phase, and the national curriculum statement, natural sciences. These are very important documents, curricula that basically guide teachers on what and how to teach science to young children. So as you can see on the screen here, these are principles that influence science teaching in the foundation phase, the NCS, natural sciences, learning outcome 1, science investigation, your process skills, and in the CAPS life skills for foundation phase, the natural science knowledge strands are listed as natural science concepts, your beginning knowledge topics, and your big ideas. Those are all very important to go over. So please do make sure that you read up and also you do research on these documents. So let's look at the first topic, young learners' thinking processes in science. So firstly, in Learning Unit 1, you are introduced to how scientific concepts develop in the brains, of young learners when they engage in learning activities, which leads to the development of their scientific literacy. So the notion of conceptual development in the learning of science in young learners will form the basis of our further discussions of what must be taught and how science should be taught. So let's look at the information processing model. It's basically used to explain teaching approaches, principles, and concepts that apply to foundation phase science in the South African schools. And you need to also consider if a learner attaches sense and meaning to the learning, what happens to the information? Remember, the model shows that information from the environment is registered in a learner's immediate memory, and then it's passed to his or her working memory for processing, in terms of thinking, reasoning, problem solving. So if a learner attaches sense and meaning to the learning, the information is likely to be stored for later use. That's our whole point of it, where they can think, they can reason, they can use it for problem solving activities. And now you need to consider what type of activity should teachers create. So teachers must therefore ensure that they present science activities that develop sense and meaning making, and what will determine how much attention learners give to new information. So when we think about it, it's very important that we understand that learners' self-concept will determine how much attention they give the new information. And what is one obvious way to motivate learners to become active in their own learning? We will later also learn that one way of motivating learners is to become active in their own learning is to allow them to ask questions. This was also communicated in the first learning unit about you let them ask questions about a topic and then find the answers to their questions. So remember, it's very important that you go through the information processing model and become very familiar with it and think about what do you remember about the role of working memory. You will remember that working memory is important also in reading. If too much working memory is used for the actual reading, then too little working memory is basically available to move, to encode the information into long-term memory or, for storage. When you think about encoding, what is encoding? Encoding is the causal reasoning to make the links between concepts so that the theory of a concept can be developed. And what happens during causal reasoning? You need to ask yourself questions while reading through this unit. During causal reasoning, naive theories develop into more scientific theories. And a further consideration, in explanation of the underlying principles of science learning, in the foundation phase is the role of, habits of body, habits of mind, the process skills, the big concepts in science thinking and learning. So these are all things that you are also going to go over in this learning unit. So what are the factors that influence science thinking and learning? Like I said, it's the habits of body, the habits of mind, the big concepts, the process skills. How can you as a teacher find out about what learners know about the world? So remember, when you're looking at the components of teaching science in the foundation phase, you need to consider different examples. And, young learners will probably know about insects because they have seen these flying around in their gardens. They may have parents or guardians, who talk to them about and show them the wonder of nature and the world around them. So also think about the normal things that happen to our children. They may have been stung by a bee or a wasp. So the guardians or parents may have told them to be careful when they drink cold drink, from a can because bees are attracted to the sugary solutions. They may have seen ants getting crumbs, on their floors. We all sometimes experience that during the winter periods. They may have seen cockroaches in their home. Their parents may have described them as being busy as a bee. So they may have seen films also, think about that movie, Maya the Bee, or the guardians may have read them stories about insects. So there are many ways in which children learn about the world. So these are all things that you need to consider. And how does culture influence learning? As a teacher, you should first find out what learners know about the world. Let as many learners as possible tell you what they know, because remember that children bring with them their own cultural knowledge, stories and ideas, and it may be unique to their specific culture. Everyone is different in the classroom. You may want to read up on how culture influences learning as well, just for a better background on this. There's e-resources that you can find on the internet as well. So why is it important for teachers to draw a concept map on what learners know before you start teaching a topic? It's always a good idea to draw a concept map of what learners know before you start teaching a new topic. And a concept map is it's a line diagram of connected ideas. I'm not too sure if any of you are currently doing your teaching prep, but you will notice that you can't basically give your students all the information at once. They need to have some form of mind map that allows them to connect ideas. You will find information about concept maps on the internet as well, where you can find different ways of creating it, or you can use a study guide as well to see how we've created one. You should also ask learners what they know, what they would like to know about the topic. For example, this is why one of the questions they have referred to, why is it important for teachers to ask learners about what they would like to know about the topic? For example, what they wonder. There's so many children who, when they think about insects, they probably wonder certain things, So you can ask them what they want to know. These wonderings or questions can be put on a wonder wall. I don't know if any of you are familiar with a wonder wall, but you can also check on the internet for examples. The wonderings or questions are the questions that learners want answered. And And it will actually motivate them to learn, because when you teach a topic, you should see how many of these questions can be answered. At the end of the topic, you should draw another concept map to basically see how learners' understanding of the topic has changed, through your teaching. It's also very fascinating to see how our students, our young children pick up things so fast. So why is it important for teachers to show an interest in the learning of science? So remember, it's very important that we go out of our way as teachers, in terms of getting our students to be interested in a topic, and actually it also develops their attitude, and it influences learners' attitude towards the learning of science. Think of an example of teaching a science topic. How would you go about grouping or classifying information into groups of similarity to encourage understanding? For example, insects such as bees, wasps, butterflies, ants, cockroaches, they all have 6 legs. They may or may not have wings, but they all have an exoskeleton. So, you can bring up things like they do not have lungs to breathe, but they have a network of tiny tubes. These tubes are called, you consider what they call. They have a compound eyes. Insects are different from small animals such as spiders and worms. And think about, spiders only have 2 body parts. They have simple eyes and they have 8 legs. Worms have, many body parts like leg-like bristles and simple eyes. So in science, we group or classify all living animal, insects into larger and larger groups of similarity. So in our example, we could classify the animals we listed as invertebrates, because all of them have exoskeleton instead of an inner skeleton of bones or cartilage. So we can break this big group into smaller groups. For example, spiders, insects, worms. So each of these groups can be separated into smaller groups. So this is how you need to consider. If you think that you have very limited understanding of insects, you may want to look for books on insects, at your local library, because when it comes to being a science and technology teacher, you have to have the knowledge to go into the classroom and get your students thinking. Alternatively, refer to additional resources that you can get from the UNISA library. The topic insects can be taught using several big ideas, and this is where we're going to talk about that now. Okay, first I'm just showing you the diagram that shows that information from the environment is registered, in a learner's immediate memory and then passed on to his working memory for processing, in terms of thinking, reasoning, and problem solving. So look at the environment. We need to get our students to see things, to hear things, to touch, to smell, to taste. So they can register the information within the immediate memory, and then it goes into the working memory where we create experiences that they can make sense of the information, whether they and encode it to the long-term memory. Our main aim is so that they don't forget the information, but they register it into the long-term storage. And this is also part of the self concept where we talked about the cognitive belief system that you can read more about. Okay, so the factors that influence science thinking and learning, we did mention it earlier, but this is basically how you need to go in depth into these topics. They're very important within this LSK3701 module in terms of, applying your content to the to this information, when you are writing your assignments as well as your exams. You need to understand the big concepts or ideas. That's basically, concepts are building blocks, of knowledge, and they allow people to organize and categorize information. And this can be applied to the solution of new problems, in everyday experience. We discuss concepts and development of concepts in Unit 1 as well. You should revise the unit often, as you develop a good understanding of what a concept is. Otherwise, you could develop a habit of teaching science as facts rather than starting young learners on a path of developing concepts in the learning of science. So teaching for conceptual change means that learners are given the opportunity to make observations, to ask questions about their observations, and to find these answers, to these questions by communicating their ideas as well. And this is where you need to refer to the information processing model that we just went past, at all times, to remind yourself of how children actually learn. So if you had to do research on the big concepts, these are the big concepts, conservation, cause and effect, place change, adaptation, relationships and interdependence, and diversity and individuality. So there's a lot of information that you're going to be reading about in the study guide, so that you can understand each one, to the best of your ability and able to apply it to your theme plans and to your lesson plans. So remember, conservation is the careful preservation and protection of something. So in different contexts, you will consider this. We refer to, just say, for example, a natural resources, we prevent it from exploitation, destruction, or neglect. And when you look at cause and effect, a cause is an event or an action that causes something else to happen, while an effect is an event or action that happen as a result of another event or action, So, for example, if we eat too much or too much of the wrong type of foods and we are inactive, we could become obese. And if we eat too many sugar-based foods, we can be at a higher risk of becoming diabetic. So these are things that you need to consider when you're teaching. When you took a look at place, we are all citizens of the world, and then of our continent, our country, our town, in our suburb. So we need to understand our place. We need to understand what impact we have on the place where we live in the world as a whole. So reflect on your place, for instance, in the world, and the impact you have on the place where you live and work in the world as a whole. If we look at adaptation, let's look at change first. So the world is forever changing. Remember, think about the kind of world your grandparents and parents lived in, and what did they do for entertainment? What did they buy? Where did they live? Do you think they live closer to the natural environment? Now compare that to the way you live. We are sure you will agree that times have changed. And now think about the learners you are going to teach. We do not know how the world will change for these learners or how the world is currently changing for them. But there are many changes that people experience all the time. And what are learners' experiences about these changes in their bodies, the place where they live, the social circumstances they find themselves in? So you need to consider all of this. When it comes to adaptation, remember, adaptation is the continuous change normally necessitates continuous adaptation, or else living, just if we look at living organism, where they will not survive. Adaptation is the process of change by which species become better suited to the environment. So you need to consider all of this. And then we look at relationships and interdependence. When you take a note of different, for example, if we look at a meerkat used to explain relationship and interdependence, there are relationships between individuals of a meerkat family, and they're dependent on one another for safety. And also, children need to develop a sense of their place in society and how we are all in some form of relationship, whether it be teacher, learner, parent, child, worker, boss, doctor-patient relationships. So learning about relationships even in the animal kingdom can develop an idea of relationships and how we depend on one another. And now when you look at diversity and individuality, so life skills curriculum suggests that the foundation phase learners should learn about diversity and individuality, by thinking about how they're the same as their classmates and how they are different from one another. They are the same in that they are human beings with a particular body structures, 2 arms, 2 legs. Unless they have disabilities, then obviously we need to explain them about diversity in that sense as well. So they differ in their personalities and the shape of their eyes, their eye color, their physical traits, and they all have their own unique fingerprints, DNA, blood type. So even though they are all different, they are all human. So we need to, ensure that within the science, we also teach our students about diversity and individuality. And then we look at scientific knowledge. It's scientific knowledge, in terms of, I think that's in the next slide. But let's look at the habits of mind. Habits of mind are 16 characteristics of good problem solvers. You can see that on the top there, where you see persisting, thinking about thinking, all of that. So remember, from the information processing model, we know that the information from the environment is registered in the learner's immediate memory, and that is transferred to the working memory for processing. So if a learner attaches sense and meaning to learning, it is likely to be stored for problem solving. And this is where we talk about habits of mind. So the habits of mind model refers to characteristics that, that basically give off good problem solvers, especially in the foundation phase, for which there are no immediate and obvious solutions to the activities we give them. But if we strive for an education system that aims to develop learners' problem solving skills, it makes sense to include learning activities that develop these habits of mind characteristics, So you might have to look up the meaning of some of these phrases, whether it's striving for accuracy, gathering data through senses, creating and imaging and innovating, thinking independently, all of these. So these habits of mind are relevant not only for developing problem-solving activities for learners, but also developing higher order thinking and creativity. Do you remember Bloom's taxonomy? If not, go online and revise higher order thinking. Further, there are habits of mind according to which young learners are specifically described as visualizers, experimenters, describers, representers, inventors. Children's habits of mind are used in Learning Unit 3 to describe the development of learning activities. You'll notice that as well. Let's look at habits of body. So habits of body is basically the physical movement, gross motor and sensory motor activities, eye-hand coordination, these skills. So remember, young learners learn science not only in formal settings, such as classroom activities, but also through play. During play, children move their bodies, they explore their environment. They therefore get practice in coordinating movements and processing the resulting sensory input. So it is through play that children actually develop their gross motor skills, fine motor skills, eye-hand coordination, and visual perceptual skills. So as teachers, we need to be aware of the importance of certain play activities. And later learning should provide young learners, we need to provide young learners space and opportunities to play with objects and just basically develop these concepts, within their brain in different kind of settings. Let's look at the process skills, which are very important. So when learners investigate the world around them, they're inquiring about the world. The process of inquiring involves observing, comparing, classifying, measuring, experimenting, and communicating. So using process skills enables learners to apply concepts, to enlarge, extend the current concepts and to develop new concepts. So process skills basically allow learners to process new information through concrete experiences. If you look at observing, we receive information about the world around us through our senses, whether it be sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. So observation is the most fundamental process skill, where we conduct scientific investigations that require observation. Learners can examine the size, the shape, the color, the texture, and so on. When you look at science process skill comparing, teachers should ask questions to encourage learners to find the likeness, the similarities and the difference between objects. They should start by getting learners to tell them the characteristics of each object. Thereafter, they should also, get learners to see the similarities. Let's look, for example, we can develop a mental picture of a specific concept. For example, fruits. It's not useful for learning to only be able to name all the fruits. What colors, what shapes are they, and so forth. So as teachers, we need to consider all of this. And then when we look at classifying, scientists make sense of the natural world through process of classification, because classification in science learning begins when children sort and group real objects. So, where we get children, a subset is a group of objects. So children initially group objects using a characteristic only, but later on we can group objects according to 2 or more characteristics. For example, all the red fruit, like, they'll put red apple, orange fruit, and later the fruit can be separated into fruits with 1 seed, with many seeds, things like that. So as you go along, you can give them more information. So the inquiry activities may be used to develop learners' ability to use the skill of classification and their knowledge of relevant scientific concepts. And then you look at measuring. Measuring is basically it is a way of explaining the world mathematically. So at first, children learn the differences between short and long, for example, and we can think, of a short and tall, maybe giraffes or animals, short and tall bean plant, things like that. So foundation phase learners have to sometimes measure length, volume, capacity, mass, time, temperature, So all of this is part of the inquiry-based learning that learners will develop these concepts better. When we look at communicating, communicating is basically the skill of describing what is observed. So communication can happen orally, whether in form of pictures, maps, graphs, tables. So during communication, information is collected, arranged, and presented in a way that helps others understand its meaning. So as teachers, we need to question learners to allow them to communicate their understanding, whether it be oral, written reports, drawings, even creative writing such as poems and dramas. This way you can also think about the 16 habits of mind, thinking and communicating with clarity and precision. So good problem solvers are able to use their understanding of a situation and communicate their thinking clearly. Okay, and then you look at gathering and organizing information. So gathering information and organizing information, is also part of, represents the 16 habits of mind. When one gathers data, you strive for accuracy, not only collecting the data, but also communicating it. So this is also something that we need to teach our young learners how to record findings, whether it be in tables, graphs. And as teachers, we should consider the cognitive development of foundation phase learners when we teach them, to draw graphs and, the conceptual steps when we teach them how to draw a bar graph. Inferring and predicting, it's basically the ability to take a risk and make predictions, and it's very necessary for understanding cause and effect as well. So we already seen that the causal reasoning is important for conceptual change. So inference is basically arrived indirectly, whether it be observations are generally arrived directly. So when you make an inference, you usually guess backwards. So for example, if you go to a doctor because you have a high temperature and red spots, you get these are observed, the doctor will make an inference that the cause of the high temperature is the measles virus. So the doctor does not see the virus, but guesses backwards to what caused the observations. So inferences give observations meaning, and this is how you need to understand it and read about it. Forming hypothesis. This is for an investigation to be called an experiment. It must have a hypothesis, and variables. So it must be, controlled. So you need to read up on hypothesis, in terms of how to write an hypothesis statement, a relationship between two variables. And when we look at separating variables, you need to consider the variables are usually controlled to give a fair test. So there are three kinds of variables that you need to read about: the independent variables, the dependent variables, the fixed variables. Do some activities on this so that you have a better understanding and be able to apply this, in any theme or any question in the assignment in the exam. So these are just questions that you need to go through when you're going through your study guide about the big concepts, big ideas. I basically touched on everything as far as possible for this presentation, but now it's where you need to take these questions like, what are concepts referred to? What does concepts allow learners to do? So while you're reading through the study guide, you can go through these questions and see if you can answer this so that you know that you've touched on everything that you meant to touch on. Okay, so what is very important is scientific knowledge. So scientific knowledge is in the CAPS life skills for foundation phase document, where you need to understand these four that are on your screen now, in terms of life and living, planet Earth and beyond, energy and change, matter and materials. Also, you need to ask yourself questions in terms of what are the scientific knowledge and concepts classified or grouped into content areas in the curriculum documents called. So remember, scientific knowledge and concepts are classified or grouped into the content areas, also called the knowledge strands in the curriculum documents. So the 4 science content strands of South African curriculum are life and living, like I said, which are, for example, animals, plants, the environment. When it comes to planet Earth and beyond, we think of soil, water, air, stars, planets. Energy and change, forces, movement and energy, matter and materials, the nature of materials. So go through these questions while you're going through this section as well. What are the 4 science content strands of the South African curriculum? So these are the 4. Describe each content area like I described in terms as I briefly described. But if you look at the CAPS document, you will be able to find more topics that fall under these content areas. What should foundation phase teachers know about their learners? Foundation phase teachers should know their learners and the level at which they understand scientific concepts. An example of a concept, such as photosynthesis. Foundation phase teachers use the word photosynthesis and expect learners. Basically, they can't use the word photosynthesis and expect learners to know that it is a process that happens in green plants, in which radiant energy from the sun is changed into chemical energy in the plants. It's too complicated for our young learners. So teachers would not expect foundation phase learners to know about the different stages of the chemical processes of photosynthesis. However, according to the principles of bootstrapping, we should introduce the big word such as photosynthesis to learners so that they have a word onto which they can strap or tie the later meaning making. Without the word photosynthesis, there will be no meaning making of the process of photosynthesis. So we need to give them these words and give them ideas and, specifically the scientific concepts. And this is how it happens in the brain, as we looked at in the information processing model. So further consideration is something that you need to look at in respect of the content areas as it's classified into the content strands. And remember, this is also according to the big ideas that come from the study of young children that you need to understand as well. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this presentation. Like I said, this presentation is just to give you a basic introduction to this learning unit so that you are familiar with all the content that you are going to go through. So while you study this unit, you'll develop science content knowledge, particularly about insects, or consider other examples while you're going through this unit as well for teaching in the foundation phase. Since it is not possible to deal with all science content in a single module, you need to develop that curiosity about the world around you, working with different topics. And furthermore, your science content knowledge is likely to increase as you develop learning activities for your foundation phase classes. So in this unit, you are introduced to the big concepts as organizers of science knowledge, and that facilitate the understanding across topics. And process skills in the learning of science were explained, and you were shown how these skills develop in scientific investigations. However, I didn't go through it very thoroughly, but it's something that you need to go work through your activities and go through the study guide quite thoroughly and apply it to your different activities. You learn that science topics that must be taught are found in the specific curriculum documents, and the topics are typically categorized into one of the knowledge strands of the science, as we mentioned in the previous slide. So the following units will set out on how teaching of science and assessments of learners are planned and carried out. So I hope to see you in the next presentation. All the best, students, and I hope that you will make sure that you consider doing all the activities within this learning unit so that you get the application knowledge required to work through your assignment and your exam successfully. All the best. Thanks for listening. Bye.